Hello, my name is Amy from Game Dev London, and today I'm doing a podcast with Laura to talk about safety in MMOs. So here is Laura. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Amy. Thank you so much for inviting me on to talk with you today. My name's Laura Higgins. I'm the Director of Community Safety and Civility at Roblox. I'm sure most of you might have heard of Roblox. We're one of the biggest user-generated platforms in the world. We currently have nearly 50 million daily active users on the platform. Every experience within the platform is user-generated. We'll go into a lot more detail on that, I'm pretty certain. Overall, our mission at Roblox is to connect billions of people in the metaverse with optimism and civility, and that's where I step in. I've been with Roblox for over 3.5 years now. And prior to that, I was the operations manager at the UK Safer Internet Centre, working within the charity sector, supporting people who were suffering with online harms. So that's really brought a lot of insight into the work that I do, and hopefully we can talk through some of that. I've spent my whole life working in safeguarding in one form or another, working in real world safeguarding with vulnerable people who needed support. I was a probation officer, and I've worked with people with substance misuse and homeless issues, for example, many, many years ago. But through that, did a lot of work around child protection, particularly. And then that turned into online safeguarding. And that's really been my path for the rest of my career.
Wow, that sounds really great. So have your previous roles helped you with this role in Roblox? Because obviously this role in Roblox is a bit different from the stuff you've done previously. So can you tell us more about your journey into the games industry, essentially?
Yeah, very much so. The switch between real world safeguarding and working within the UK Safer Internet Centre was probably the first big leap. It made so much sense to me because the same issues that people were facing in online environments were really the same ones they were facing in offline. So it was bullying, it was harassment, it was, incivility, if you like, hacking and things like fraud, actually. They're things that people are experiencing in the real world. I was an early adopter of social media, and in the old school used to be in chat rooms, and I really loved tech and the communities that I found there. And then as they were becoming more and more mainstream, and particularly for young people, it was obvious there was a crossover in the need to support them with those things. And in those early days, I was actually a committee member with Children in Need for the BBC for several years as well. And at that time, we were starting to see how people who didn't work in tech actually started to need to think about how to safeguard people in spaces. So we were starting to encourage some of the people applying for funding, for example, if they were supporting young people, they needed to make sure that they thought about online environments as part of the safety of how they were going to protect those young communities as well. So I was really there at the beginning of that movement. In my time at the Safer Internet Centre, I initially came in to set up a helpline for schools. Predominantly, it was for anyone with a duty of care for children. So we did support the police and social workers and healthcare and foster parents, for example. But most of the calls we got were from schools. And it was to help them with any digital issues and concerns that they had. A lot of the issues they were facing were actually offline issues. It was actually a bullying issue amongst a group of friends that was then spilling over into their online world. Obviously, where we could help is if there were, for example, videos of people who were being bullied or abused in some way, we would work with the school to help them get that content removed. We know that that can continue to abuse somebody if that content's available online. Yeah. But actually to work with the educators to help them to understand this wasn't an issue with social media. This was actually an issue within their school that they needed to tackle, was really quite transformative for a lot of those people, I think. It was quite easy for them to say, this happened outside the school gates, it's not our problem. Obviously, we had to help them change that narrative that, yes, it was great they were contacting us, that they saw their duty care to their pupils, but that actually there was within the school that help with some of these as well, in terms of how they talked about media. You know, a lot of schools at that time, it was like once a year they would have an kids in and say, right, we're going to play, and it was a really scary video. It didn't really apply to most incidents or to most kids, and they actually forgot to talk about the data. Here's how you should behave, here's what you can expect on social media, and how, you know, you participant, but also how to protect yourself and those around you. So it was really interesting watching that development. One of the things that we really specialized in my previous role was about engaging with the tech companies. So we were very much a charity and came from the support side. There was a perception, and I think there still is, from policymakers and lawmakers and the media, that tech don't care. It's like, that was it. That was the narrative. Well, there's no point in us reporting it because nothing will happen. And we didn't believe that. We felt very much that actually when we were digging into things, quite often we would find that people hadn't reported it using the right channels. They didn't know the words to use. So we would help them, and quite often they would be like, oh, that was amazing. It actually did get dealt with when we did what we said. So there was definitely an education piece that was needed. So again, you know, the progress of the work that my team did was about helping people understand how they could, you know, for schools and things, how they could help to manage these issues. Also, whilst we weren't there to be cheerleaders for all of tech, they made a lot of mistakes and still do from time to time, but actually to try to make them stop just looking like totally the bad guys. And so we engaged really positively with the companies in terms of helping mediate when it needed, you know, if content needed taking down and things like that. We helped them also to understand the challenges that people were facing. In a very positive way. We were like the critical friends, if you like, who would say, you know, it's really frustrating for people that you say, oh, we don't tolerate this thing on our platform, but then actually it makes it really hard to report it. Those sorts of conversations were happening. Started engaging really closely with a lot of the tech companies, and I ended up being on the advisory boards of Twitter and Snapchat, and working really closely with Meta, Facebook at the time, particularly around violence against women and girls, which was really interesting at that time. They were really progressive, actually, in the work they were doing to try to minimize harm there. And then later, Roblox. Actually, we ended up working together on some negative news stories that were happening in the UK that actually weren't particularly truthful. And from our point of view, you know, we saw an opportunity to try and educate parents and educators around what Roblox was, and engaged really positively with them. And so having that relationship opened the door to, hold on a minute, there's so much opportunity. And I think the tech companies at the same time really valued having input from charity sector, from experts from different fields, rather than just having moderators who were looking at community standards and purely acting on those. And we've actually seen over the last probably 10 years a real change in the way that companies are employing, how they're recruiting people. They are looking much more at having a broader range of policy staff and child safety professionals, safeguarding and so on.
That's brilliant. So you mentioned that you went into schools to talk about these tech issues and stuff. And have you seen over time this getting worse or this getting better? Have you seen persistent issues throughout the years that haven't been stopped yet? Can you tell us more a bit about that sort of side of things?
So this is really interesting. As a lived experience, I have a teenager in my house. And so, you know, we have an amazing relationship, and sometimes he's like, I hate that you do what you do for a living because you know everything. It's really annoying. At the same time, every now and then something will happen between him and his group of friends, and he'll be able to come to me and go, we don't know what to do. Can you help us? And that's just been so amazing.
Yeah.
I think it's really difficult, isn't it? That I think sometimes the seriousness of some of the things that are happening for young people now have really got worse. I think young people are more vulnerable. It's really difficult. I'm going to sound like I'm contradicting myself. We know young people, everyone has suffered through the pandemic with their mental health, and no one more than young people. They've been cut off from their normal lives just as they're kind of stepping out into their world of being free. They've been locked down. They've lost contact with their friends, and it's been really challenging. So it's a time when they should be able to go build resilience, but they haven't. So I actually feel they're more vulnerable now than they have been. They've missed that stage where they would normally be able to go and take a few risks, but it'd be okay, and then learn from it. So yeah, we have this group of older teenagers who I think, yeah, I worry about quite a lot. They are living, or have been living, everything online. There's a lot of disinformation out there. We know that. There's a lot of really biased views and opinions out there. And some of what's been happening, I think, has been unmonitored. I'm using that very loosely. And so, yeah, I think there's some of the serious harms I've seen escalate, and I know have escalated. Sadly, the day-to-day things that young people are facing, bullying, you know, low-level bullying, perhaps, just people being mean, it does chip away at you, and that's never changed. And that makes me quite sad, really, that it's like we have all these tools and we all talk about it and we all go and do training, and there are organizations that go and help with anti-bullying, but it's still happening. It's still happening on a massive scale. But again, as I say, a huge amount of that bullying isn't that it's online specific bullying. It's bullying that's happening to them in the playground, on the school bus. It's, you know, friend groups falling out, and then it spills over.
Yeah.
The bit where digital steps in is, of course, it just follows you home, and it's just everywhere that you go. So yeah, it makes me sad that we haven't got better solutions for that and haven't been able to tackle that. And I think it's a really huge societal issue, and one I'd love us to really focus on. At the same time, obviously, I know from a policy, legal point of view, we have to focus on the most serious harms, which thankfully, touch wood, don't affect most young people. But for those that it do, it's incredibly serious. The only other thing I would really comment on, and I remember doing interviews in 2012, and they were saying, what's changed? What's changed in the landscape? And I'm going to say the same thing now, because it's changed again from then, is it's happening younger and younger. So if we were to talk about, you know, some of the serious things like sexting, for example, we used to talk about older teenagers who were experimenting in relationships. I actually had a call with an educator a couple of days ago. He's a pastoral lead in a boarding school, and he's like, I used to talk to you about this. We had like year 10, year 11, we were supporting them. He's like, now it's year 7 and year 8. And we're not having those conversations young enough to, or when we do, we're like, oh, we don't want to talk about it too much in case we seem to be encouraging them in some way, but it's already happening. So I think that's the bit that's quite shocking for everybody, because parents don't want to hear that their kids are behaving in those ways or being, or seeing those things. But, you know, I will always say we need to start these conversations much younger. It doesn't have to be big, scary conversations, but actually the whole range of conversations about what your digital world is like, what your rights are as a person, how to protect yourself, what support there is, and just keeping those conversations going, I think, is so important. At the moment, it's great. We've seen a shift. There is more digital and media literacy, but it still tends to focus on the misinformation, disinformation, those sorts of things. We're not really tackling some of those bigger, scary topics because none of us really want to talk about it.
Yeah. And do you think in a way that obviously we want to make sure kids are staying safe by going into schools and giving them talks on this sort of stuff, but from experience, I know a lot of kids don't really like to listen to talks and stuff. How might you engage them in these? Do you think you might use some examples from games that they might like from that audience? Or how do you think people should tackle this to really make sure kids stay engaged and understand?
So when I used to go into schools, and that was several years ago now, I think things have changed. You're right. I don't particularly listen that well, or I might only take away 3 things. A lot of this really is around, I think for the younger kids, it's about trying to engage the parents. And I think if any educators are listening to this, they're all going to sigh, because it was always a challenge then, and it will be a challenge now, of you have busy parents who have so many things to worry about and deal with. And many of them might feel a little bit disengaged with the online stuff. They're like, oh, you know, I'm worried about it, but I've got all these other things to think about. But really, it is about how we get those conversations to continue at home, as well as then that little bit of education for kids. What I've seen in the past, and it really it distresses me greatly, is a lot of people who go and do sessions for parents will use, for example, games. But what they're showing parents is, here's what happens in these 18+ games that your kids are looking at. Isn't it terrifying? You need to make sure your kids are not looking at this stuff. Which, of course, then the parents go home and go, what games are you playing? I need to know. And now you're banned from your Xbox or your PS4, which is really not the right way to go about it. As you said, you know, actually encouraging the positivity of the gaming space and those sort of examples that are out there. You know, the flip side of that, I still do a little bit of this with Roblox and work with partners who do it, like whether it be a bit of gamification of learning. You know, there are some great organizations here in the UK who work with really young kids who are just starting their journey with platforms like Roblox and others, where they will make teaching resources, but we'll use, you know, some of our avatars. They've asked, you know, we work together on this stuff. So they're able to use images and pictures from Roblox and some of our assets. Because then the kids, but they're doing maths and English. They're not learning about games, but it just gets them a bit more engaged and a bit more excited, and it's a bit more fun for them. I think that's a really positive way from a younger child perspective.
Of course.
You know, there are really positive, there are exciting things happening. We're seeing more and more, as I say, when I use the term gamification, there are so many life skills and lessons that people can use through games. So we know that there are, you know, people learning financial skills through experiences, those sorts of things happening. So we would, you know, personally, I'd really encourage that, but it can't just be a every now and then. It needs to become part of either curriculum, something that's much more natural. Otherwise kids just go, oh, that was a fun lesson, and it's gone. We need to find a way that it's much more of a natural process.
Of course. So how about so I'm sure people from the audience would want to know the sorts of things you're doing at Roblox, because there might be people here who play Roblox and they're a bit curious about what you do exactly, and they might be interested in your role. So what would you say to those people?
So I have a really strange role, not only at Roblox, but actually within the games industry. I know all the time I go and talk and people say, I've never heard of a civility director. What is it you do? And one thing is, like, people have this myth idea that civility equals nice. It's about being nice all the time. It's really not, actually. Of course, we would love it if everyone was nice all the time. But actually, it's just about encouraging people to behave in the same way that you would face to face. You know, we do hear that sometimes, whether it be through anonymity or just being behind a screen, that people sometimes will act differently than they would in the real world. Now, it might be that there's a group of people playing something that I might find slightly offensive or inappropriate, obviously within the rules. We have very strict rules on Roblox, obviously. But actually, if they're with peers and friends and they're all being respectful of one another and they're all within that lane, that's not causing too much harm. It's only when people who aren't expecting that, or aren't the same age perhaps, or aren't used to the way that they're talking to each other, that's when it becomes uncivil if they're not respectful that somebody else has come in and adapting and changing. We want all spaces to be welcoming for everybody, but we do appreciate people need different spaces and different communities because of who they are, because of the age they are, because of what they're going online to try to achieve. We're not trying to make everyone the perfect 7-year-old online citizen. We appreciate that when you're 16 or 17, you want a very different experience. You want to be able to have different conversations with your friends when you're online. So it's about those kind of cultural norms and trying to replicate them in a way in online spaces. So my day-to-day, I have two groups that I work with. One is the external audience and one is actually the internal audience at Roblox. So I do a lot of talking, as you can tell, to everyone from, again, parents, kids, teens, educators, police, governments, other tech companies. We do a huge amount of work collaboratively together to resolve and talk about some of these issues. And I work with safety partners all over the world. So part of our mission at Roblox, you know, in terms of how we reach all these millions of people that we want to around the world, we could just go in and be like, hey, we're this Silicon Valley company and here's what we think. What we actually choose to do is go work with really great organizations in different countries talk to them and learn from them and get them to help us amplify the messages we want to get across.
Right.
So whether it is the basics of here's how you use Roblox and here's the tools that you have, but put it in their own words, not just our words. We also listen about what those issues are in those countries. What are the cultural difficulties that they have? Perhaps, you know, if we have a smaller group of developers in that region, what are the sort of barriers to them wanting to come and create on the platform? So then stuff gets fed back internally. I work cross-functionally across all of the different teams. So it might be that I'm having a conversation with trust and safety around some of the moderation. It could be something to do with chat filters where we're like, oh, did you know that term means something very different in this country than it does in that country? It could be working with product on a sensitivity around something in a particular country where we need to be mindful of that. So it's really, really helpful in informing our practice in-house, particularly, again, any engagement that we have with families and young people directly, having those direct, I hate the term case studies, but that's essentially what they're giving us is, here's how I've used Roblox in this way, and here's what happened to me, both good, bad, and ugly. You know, it's really helpful for us to be able to reflect on that, whether it be that it does affect change or whether it just spurs people on to go, we're doing a really good job. You know, through the pandemic, we just heard from so many people of so many different ages just how important it was for them to have a safe place where they could come, still feel like themselves, still do the things that they wanted to do and be with their friends. You know, people were using the term lifeline, and it wasn't just kids with kids and being able to hang out, but actually it was families who were connecting, who weren't able to be together. So we heard all these really heartwarming stories of like over Thanksgiving in the States, there were like 3 generations of a family all playing and meeting in Roblox and hanging out. It was beautiful. So for us to hear that, it's like, okay, now that's why I'm getting up tomorrow to go to work. It's really fascinating and brilliant to hear that we're still providing that. So yeah, the education piece for me, as I say, partly educating others outside, but also bringing that in and helping to educate the company on why we're doing some of the things that we're doing.
Oh, that's wonderful. So I was sort of thinking about how someone maybe from an outside perspective, so a parent and a teacher, a guardian of a child, how they could help if they notice something going wrong, but they don't understand the platform. What could they do to reach out?
So, I mean, hopefully we don't get to that stage. You know, one of the things that is a huge part of not just my job, but all of the other companies that I work with, one of the things we really want families to try to do is to be comfortable talking about what people are doing when they're online. And as I say, it's not about trying to catch them out because they're doing something bad. It's just that in the same way that you say, hey, how was your day? Hey, how was your evening when you were online? Like, you're not spying on them, but just genuinely to get an understanding of what they like to do, what platforms they're on. You don't have to know Roblox. You don't have to know even how to play, but actually just to sit, particularly, you know, most of the people we're talking about are probably under 13, just to have a feel for what it's like for them. Get them to show you the things that they enjoy doing, because at that age, they really probably will show you. They want you to be interested. They want to show you, and it's fun. If you're then brave enough to step in and go, all right, come on, let's have a go, even though you know you're going to be terrible, it's a really nice bonding moment. And it also gives you that opportunity to have those conversations about what would you do if, before it happens, hopefully.
Yes.
Do you know, like, if somebody was horrible to you, do you know how to report them? Yeah, so that's where we'd really like to be, but we know that's not always the case. Within Roblox, we have a whole suite of parental controls. So for the very youngest ones coming on the platform, we want parents involved right from the beginning to almost help their child to find their feet with those safeguards in place. And then the idea being that as their kids get more confident and more savvy online, that the parents then reduce these controls and sort of let them have the reins back to go and explore and do things by themselves. But you know, any platform with parental controls, one of the challenges is that take up is generally quite low. And so we'd really love to see more take up. But again, you know, it's not about chastising parents. We know that they're really busy. To your point of when something goes wrong. So with us, you know, we have obviously reporting tools within the platform. We actually have contact forms. Parents can just contact us and reach out if they're really panicking, if there's something happening. But we do have those things that should be able to manage most issues very easily within the platform as well. But my big advice, I think, for any parents, again, is don't panic. The first time, like if you're not regularly having these conversations with your kids, if they come to you and tell you something's happened, quite often parents will just hit the roof. They almost end up kind of telling the child off, even though the child's had this bad experience, because that's your gut instinct is like, I'm really like cross, upset, don't know what to do. So it's about being calm, let the child tell you what's happened and ask them what kind of support they want as well. They don't necessarily always want you to go wading in, reporting somebody, because if it is a school friend, it could make it worse. There might be reprisals. They might, it might just be that they just want to talk to you about what happened and reflect on it. So I think it's about sort of slow it down, let them know they can trust you, work for it together, and then work together to find the appropriate resolution. But then it's about just keeping that conversation so that if something happens again, your kid's going to come back to you. If you're irate, if you say, right, that's it, you can't go back on there, they're probably not going to talk to you when they're on a different platform and something else happens. So it is just about leaving the door open and building that trust together. But just try not to panic. There is always a solution somewhere.
Okay. So what about, so this kind of got covered, but where is the line when it comes to online security and help and parents? So where's that line?
So, I mean, this is very, very timely with over the last few years, and will continue for several years in the UK, online safety bill conversations. We've had the age-appropriate design code. All of these things are really putting, and rightfully, a huge focus on the responsibility of tech platforms to protect their communities.
Yes.
This has all been in the news for such a long time, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing, As I say, for me, tech companies have never tried to have people have a bad time on their platforms. That would be a terrible business model because nobody would be there.
Yeah.
What has happened is that people had a good idea and they just haven't been able to either scale up, or their business model isn't conducive to total sort of holistic well-being of the users for various reasons. But nobody's really ever started out going, I'm going to be an awful place and really abuse everyone on the platform. So I think that's a good place to start. But it is good that there is more scrutiny and that people will have to step up and, show their commitment. It's all very well saying we're committed to safety, but you actually have to demonstrate it. And I think that's what will happen. So ultimately, if you build a platform and you invite people into it, the buck stops with you. That's the first thing. A lot of people talk about safety by design. It's a very well recognized model now, and it is, what everybody should be thinking about. If you were to build a house, but it wasn't structurally sound, you would be responsible if the roof fell on people. It's no different in a platform. You have to make sure that it is fit for purpose and safe and healthy. But the world changes, so you have to be agile, and sometimes things will still happen. There is no platform in the world that's going to be 100% safe at all times, because unfortunately bad actors are very creative. They will also be looking at ways to circumnavigate whatever we put in place. So, having that, you can risk assess as much as you like and have the best tools. You have to be ready to keep iterating. But as I say, nothing's ever foolproof. And that's where everybody else's responsibility comes in, including the users on your platform. Even if they're young, it's about us saying, look, here's what we're going to do to protect you. Here are some tools, whether it be how to use the block button or the report button.
Yeah.
If people don't use them, that makes it very difficult for us, because then the bad actor carries on and can harm lots of people. So we have to ask, please do your part. Not only can you not be a bad actor, we want you to be a good person on the platform, play your part in being good, but also report it so we know that there's a problem. That's their part. When it comes to families, to educators, it is very much that broader skills. It's around, and it's many faceted. One is, them helping. Do you know how to use the tools? Their tools are here. So repeating those messages, helping to build that healthy behaviours in young people, particularly. Hopefully those young people continue to be healthy as they're older. But, you know, just reiterating what good looks like as an, you know, I think that's a fair thing to ask, in the same way that parents are having conversations with their kids about saying, don't go out and go shoplifting. Hopefully they're having conversations saying, hey, don't go out and hack people's accounts. It's really not a very nice thing to do. Again, when it comes to kind of bullying and things like that, you know, actually having those regular conversations. It's not about having conversations about online. It's just talking about bullying with your kids, whether it be them being a victim or even a perpetrator, and recognizing that. So that's, I think, where the parents really come in, is just reiterating and reinforcing those messages, being present as much as possible with their young people. Obviously, if things do get seriously wrong, we would like them then to also step in and help us all to resolve those issues. But it is very much a shared responsibility. Everybody who's involved in that space, we all have to work together. But yeah, ultimately, you know, when it comes to safety, the tech platforms have to be number one in terms of putting things in place and doing what they say they're going to do. There are always going to be things that will fall outside of that it's very difficult for us to manage, because you know, for example, if a child steals a parent's credit card and makes loads of purchases, there's no tool in the world that can detect that that's what's happened. In those cases, unfortunately, it is just a case of fixing it as quickly as possible, and platforms being having very generous and responsive policies and practices in place to support families to put things right. But yeah, on the whole, when it comes to safety, as we're thinking about it, then yeah, it starts with the platforms.
Great. So how about, I guess it doesn't really count with platforms outside of Roblox that are mentioned inside of Roblox. For, let's say, for example, Discord. What happens if something were to happen on Discord from Roblox?
So this is an interesting one, and something, you know, I can't speak specifically on Roblox, but we have seen a real movement to companies feeling that duty of care, and certainly is something we do see, a duty of care for our community when they're not just in Roblox. We can't control what happens outside of Roblox. Yeah. But we can listen, we can hear, we can try to offer support. So, for example, in terms, you know, previously I've given advice to parents about saying, your kids may well be chatting on other platforms. It looks like they're on Roblox, but they might not be. Go have that conversation. Just be aware, familiarize yourself. That will help you to understand what these platforms are that people are using. We work really, really well across industry. There is so much collaboration between all of the organizations. Obviously, there are some things we can't share. It's sensitive information. We are all corporate businesses, and there will be an element of things we cannot share. But when it comes to user safety, I've never seen so much collaboration and a will to protect each of our communities. So whilst we're not directly at a stage yet where we can kind of go, oh, you know, this person's on this platform, we need to ban them off everywhere, there is dialogue that does happen to make spaces less welcoming for somebody who is causing trouble in those places. Of course, if it is a really serious issue and the police are involved, then that collaboration is working because it's led by law enforcement, which is a very different thing anyway. You know, it's interesting talking about, you know, so we acquired Gilded, which is another chat platform. And so I think you're probably going to see much more use of that within the Roblox community coming. And so we're learning about, you know, actually how is that going to be different? How do we support the community better? But yeah, it's about the well-being. So we can only do so much within Roblox, but we can talk about and listen to what's happening outside. So we have a young sounding board of young people from the community who come and talk to me about safety and civility. Most of it's not stuff that happens within Roblox because we have such stringent filters and safety practices in place. It's pretty hard really to do something terrible within our platform. But what they are able to talk to us about is some of the conversations that are happening on lots of different platforms, or what the experience is for people. And that then helps us to look at what we can do to support them when they're back in our platform. So mental health and well-being is a really good example of that, where a couple of years ago, you know, it was flagged to us that some of the community were really suffering with their well-being. And we're talking about some really serious issues on other platforms. And so we've kind of made a decision that over the next couple of years, you know, we are making sure that there will be access to helplines in our platform, you know, just so it's there. If people ever need it, we're just acknowledging it. We can't necessarily stop, you know, jump in a conversation at that time on a different platform, but we are listening, we do care, and we're trying to adapt what we do accordingly.
It's really nice that you actually talked about mental health as well, because of the whole COVID situation as well. I feel like some kids may have felt really lonely throughout COVID and maybe wanted to reach out and stuff. So it's really lovely to hear about that. So I did hear you mention about police and stuff. What happens when police gets involved?
So thankfully, it doesn't happen very often. There are very straightforward protocols that they have to follow in terms of requesting information from us, and that's the same for any tech company. Because we're actually based in the US, we work directly with NECMEC, who are the main reporting body there. We are actually one of the few organizations who proactively report potential grooming. So if we pick up something that we feel is really inappropriate and we're getting enough signals, some platforms will wait for a request for information. We don't. We will actually proactively report and leave it there. We don't know what happens quite often.
Yeah.
But that's okay. We've done the best we can to flag any concerning content. Obviously, we do work very proactively with law enforcement. And also here in the UK, I'm actually part of a working group with the National Crime Agency here, and CEOP, where we, it's a games industry roundtable, where we're all specifically focusing on child sexual exploitation, for example, where we talk about, you know, what tools we have, how we train moderators, all of those sorts of things, just to bring it all up to a good standard. And with that input from the police is really helpful for us to make sure that we're really trying to do all the right things and be informed. But yeah, as I say, thankfully for us, certainly it's not something that comes up too often.
So just another thing I wanted to add in, you did mention you went to the Roblox Corporation a little while ago. Tell us about how that went, without spoiling anything, of course. What was it like? Did you have fun?
So I've been with Roblox 3.5 years, and pre-pandemic I used to go and visit all the time, and it was great, and it was a hustle bustle office. So I went back it was 3 weeks ago now, and they haven't actually even all returned at that point. So it was really fascinating walking around, and there were just like small groups of people in places. But we have grown so hugely. So when I started, there were just over 400 employees. And now there's nearly 2,000 employees.
Wow.
It's just grown so much. So many people were hired through the pandemic. They've never even been to the head office. And we've had to take on 2 whole new sets of offices to seat everybody. So it was so amazing to go and see the team I have worked with and to meet all of these new colleagues who I've only ever seen on Zoom. It was literally like a party atmosphere. It was so good.
Wow.
And yeah, Roblox is just a super cool place to go and hang out always. Obviously it's in California. The weather was pretty lovely as well. But yeah, it was just so nice. There's a real feeling of things slowly starting to come back to some kind of normal. And just being able to really sort of spark off people about some of the projects we've got coming up. It was really exciting, but yeah, it was so nice to see people. But yeah, the growth is just phenomenal.
Oh, that's so cool. And you mentioned you met up with your team as well. Tell us about your team.
So when I say team, so Civility is myself and Tammy Bomick. She's amazing. Give her a name check. She's our VP of Partnerships and Civility. And it's just been us for years. But we've now joined something called the advocacy team that was actually set up last October, I think. Essentially, so all of the services that you would think really are the ones advocating for the community, so policy, etc., and government affairs, we've now joined the legal team. So yeah, we've now joined this much bigger team of people, but who are all essentially working on like the rights of the community, alongside the trust and safety team. So yeah, that's really brilliant that we're all there sharing these ideas. And obviously particularly I think with the work we do that's community focused and family focused and educator focused, then working closely with the policy team, who are much more the government affairs, they can kind of use our stories to go and have those conversations with the politicians.
Yeah.
Because it's really helpful sometimes for them also to hear the hearts and minds of what's really happening on the platform, and also to hopefully see the good work that we're doing to try to keep the community safe. So yeah, it's lovely to have that sort of team where we can all bounce off each other.
Wow, it sounds amazing to work there, and it's really nice to hear that you love working there as well. And yeah, this role sounds super interesting. You do loads of different things. So is there anything else you wanted to add just about the role or what you do?
I think one of the things that's really, I mean, one, talking to the community is such a privilege, and hearing firsthand, not just about the negative things happening, but those positive stories. We are a user-generated platform with millions of experiences. We've got thousands of people creating in the platform. And so to hear what that means for them in terms of their identity, their sense of belonging, finding their tribe, their friends, those sorts of things are just amazing for me. And it really, obviously, it gives me a great thrill in terms of the work we're doing and a positivity about Roblox specifically, but actually just to still hear from communities and from young people these nice stories. It's just nice to know that they're still going on somewhere, because all we hear in the media quite often is doom and gloom. So that's really amazing. As I said, a lot of this cross-industry working, that's amazing to see as well. And that's really come on in the last few years. There are so many great collaborations happening. So name check a couple. I'm a member of the Fair Play Alliance, where I sit on the steering committee. They have over 200 games companies coming together to learn and share ideas and, work through some of these really big topics that we talked about. I work with Raising Good Gamers over in the States. They're doing some amazing work, really getting the voice of young people to help to sort of make us all look at how what our practices are and drive things forward. So I think those sorts of projects is a real privilege to be a part of, and definitely because I don't sit specifically within safety or product, I get to kind of join in a little bit of all of those. So yeah, I think that's quite unique in my role. But yeah, it's just a real honor, I think, to be able to hear. It's very, sometimes, we work with colleagues, particularly those, bless them, working on like the engineering side or the dev side, where they're like, I'm down and I'm just getting on with my work, and they need to hear those stories to remind them of why they do what they do.
Yeah.
And it really does give them the fire in the belly when they're like, okay, this all makes sense now. I know why I've been grinding for this last 2 weeks on this particular issue, because it's going to help these people. And so to bring those stories alive for them, I think is just really, really valuable.
Do you have any story you're allowed to share, or do you have any funny stories you could share about this?
I mean, one of the ones, and I mean, we've talked about this a lot in the past. There's a young man called Alex. It's a real story, and sadly, he lost his father to suicide when he was very young. His mum was wonderful. She was already an advocate of kind of between gaming and education and therapy and sort of play. So they started using Roblox together, and he created an experience that was for other young people like him who were grieving and suffering a bit with depression. And essentially he created this obstacle course you go through, and when you start, everything's and it's quite a sad place. Go through, there's like real words of encouragement, little mental health messages, really positive reinforcements throughout. And as you go through, you get and you make achievements, and it's brighter, and there's like a rainbow world, and it makes the end of it, you just feel so happy and positive, but you're also getting some of that real kind of positive messaging that young people need. And so for him, it was so cathartic going through the process of creating it. But when he talks about it, he's like, knowing that thousands of other kids around did it, gone into his experience, and hopefully it's helped them. For him was such an amazing journey. And so, yeah, hear those sorts of stories. I mean, that's just incredible to hear. Equally, you know, we have a big LGBTQ plus community within the platform, and having spaces where they feel can come and create, be whatever they want, and hang out, and it's a fun place. You know, those stories are just so uplifting. So yeah, long live that. We want to carry on being a place where people can be whoever they want to be, in a really safe and healthy, positive place.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And I think that's a really great place to conclude this podcast. So my name, I've been Amy, and I've been here with Laura, and thank you so much for joining us. And yes, have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.